Welcome back to another episode of the HR Leaders Podcast, the show where we explore the future of work with industry experts and HR executives from the world's leading global brands. Today, we're joined by James Hartley, who's the Managing Director and Regional Head of HR EMEA at Swiss Re. Welcome to the show, James. How are you?
Thanks, Chris. Very much nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me on. I'm well, thanks, and hope you, your listeners, families and teams are all well in these challenging times.
Fantastic. I was really excited to have you on the show, and obviously same goes to you and yours, obviously on your end. And but I saw my diary this morning, and I thought, you know what, the power of purpose right now is so important now more than ever. And having that strong foundation of, for me, it's kind of a set of principles and a foundation that no matter what's going on around me in the world, that I can go back to and draw strength from. So I was really excited to have you on the show today. Before we jump in, tell everyone a bit about yourself, sort of your background and journey to where we are today.
Thanks, Chris. So James Hartley, as Chris said, currently Regional Head of HR for Swiss Re, which is one of the largest insurance and reinsurance companies. My path to HR was an interesting one. I think my early childhood aspirations were varied to either be a backing singer for ABBA, a lorry driver, or bizarrely the person that vacuumed the carpets at the royal palaces. But I quickly discovered that I couldn't carry a tune in a bucket, can't parallel park, and am no domestic goddess. So an alternative route was necessary. I've been in HR or related functions probably now for 25 years. Started in manufacturing, doing a line role and then a strategic change role, moved into asset management and did a role for AllianceBernstein out of London and then New York, moved to HSBC and did a global role there, running global commercial banking, spent some time in a small private equity-backed insurance and reinsurance broker, and been at Swiss Re now for 4 years. So singing, driving and vacuuming are all long distance memories.
So it's HR is the one that stuck.
It is.
Of all things. Well, I thought I was going to go out to be a professional breakdancer. So, I was pretty good, to be honest, but I thought, it's not really sustainable. So I'm going to get old sooner or later. I know you and the team have been on obviously a huge journey over the last few years in terms of leading with purpose and really embedding that in the culture and the core values of the organization. So let's jump straight in. Let's start with talking about what inspired that conversation internally and drove the decision to create this program?
I think the inspiration internally is from Swiss Re as an organization. So we're a deeply purposeful organization. Our global purpose is that we make the world more resilient. And I think that's so relevant and so true, particularly during this time of crisis. And we've been talking a lot about that internally. Now, that's obviously a purpose from a commercial perspective, where we are a commercial enterprise. We're not an NGO, so we do look to shareholders as well to give us the capital to be able to invest in reinsurance and insurance products that closes the protection gap and makes the world more resilient. So, I think the backdrop to the conversation we've had has very much been the backdrop of Swiss Re. That's something we talk about a lot. It's present in our internal presentations, where senior leaders start by saying how paying claims has helped rebuild communities or save lives or repair damage from natural catastrophes. So I think that's very present. In terms of specifically for our team, I went on a bit of my own personal journey, lucky enough to go through one of the Swiss Re development programs, which was absolutely about finding our path, finding what anchors us, and that really resonated with me as I worked on my own purpose. And as we looked then at the function, where I think we've had real traction with this conversation, there were a couple of additional drivers. One was a sense that leaders in the organization wanted something different from HR, wanted a different tone of voice, wanted a different perspective to help them with their own challenges. And particularly for my HR EMEA function, we were looking for something that bridged the gap between the group purpose, the group HR strategy, and their daily lives. And I think what we sensed was that we were missing a common language. We were missing something that connected us, and something that had resonance across all the different colleagues in all of the different locations in different roles, that we could come together around something that united us. So that was the kind of the inspiration and aspiration.
I see that, by the way, in a lot of businesses I speak to. They have a very strong, in many cases, spend a lot of time and energy on the business purpose and value, where they don't spend enough time is linking that back to each employee throughout the organization. I've worked in many businesses where they had a clear purpose statement, and I found myself thinking, well, how do I fit into that? What does that mean for Chris? And I think that's that, and I think that's the disconnect that we see in a lot of organizations.
Absolutely. And I think there's two things on that. One, when we built our purpose, that it was co-created by the team. So it wasn't something that just myself and the leadership team dreamt up in a darkened room. It was something that was built on the input and the collaboration and the co-creation of all of the colleagues across the region. So I think there was that personal connection. And secondly, the purpose that we've used, which is together we act with courage, we inspire confidence and accelerate business impact, were all words that had really tangible and emotional meaning. So everybody, whether it's an HR partner or a payroll advisor, can get the concept of how do we work together. They can get the concept of acting, which requires decisive choices, not just being passive. With courage, is that challenging the status quo or sitting with it? And inspiring confidence. The tone that you take with your clients or business leaders can inspire confidence, or it can inspire boredom or anything else. And moving at pace and accelerating that impact, again, was something that resonated very strongly with everybody.
What did that look like briefly? How did you go about doing that? Was it like a survey you guys sent out? Was it, bringing together different leaders from different business segments? What did that look like in terms of coming up with that?
It was a team effort. We'd had something 2 or 3 years ago when I first joined the function that we basically created in a workshop. But the process that we went through with this was we'd put some words down on a page that we thought resonated as a leadership team. We had some of the group imperatives, some of the leadership behaviors, and then went out to all of the colleagues in HR EMEA and just asked what resonated, what didn't, what were their aspirations, what did they feel that they wanted to connect to. And it was through that iterative process and just sort of challenging ourselves that we got to that. And it was really interesting, actually, Chris, that initially as a leadership team, we'd sat there and thought, yeah, actually what we've got is fine. We don't really need to change it. And we were sort of quite closed-minded initially.
I was going to ask that question. Were your predictions of what you wrote down what reflected in the team as well?
I think there's definitely some continuity there. We haven't been leading the team in abstract, but what was really interesting was things that we thought resonated. Perhaps the odd word here or there didn't resonate as much with others, and ultimately it then becomes a compilation. I think there's always a danger if you ask too many people that you start wordsmithing it here or there. But we ended up with some very clear themes or buckets that resonated with colleagues across EMEA, and that's where we landed on with that.
One of the things that I loved about our first conversation, and I see so many companies go wrong with this, is that once you put this program together, it's then about marketing and building a brand around it that people remember and they can connect to. And that's something where I see so many organizations that put together such an incredible strategy, but the execution is where they fail. And they failed to create a brand that's memorable. And so tell everyone a little bit about your little book of why, how that came to be, what was the inspiration behind that. And I think you've got a copy of it in front of you, haven't you?
Yeah, which I can wave there.
What is the little book of why?
And I think it is a really important point, because what we were keen as a leadership team, that this wasn't just a communications event, and it's not just about posters. It's genuinely about a vehicle to change culture. So there are two elements to what we created. One, as you say, is our little book of why. And what we did with that, worked with a fantastic external boutique agency, Intelligent Emotion, that just helped us frame some of those conversations. So we were inspired by something that a senior leader at Swiss Re had said, that if you get to know yourself better and you get to know others better, you will build deeper relationships and create the joint movement that we're looking for. So what we did with all of the colleagues across EMEA was get them first to think about what was important, what was the impact that they wanted to have, what did they stand for, and then worked on an individual basis to refine those purpose statements.
Mm-hmm.
We then had them share that in their team groups. What was the background to their purpose? Why did it resonate? How did they come to that point, and tell a story that brought it to life? And then invited all of their colleagues to either give feedback or share a perspective or an example where they'd seen that in practice,
Mm-hmm.
to try and build that sense of community. And those engagements were so powerful, and really created deep connections, Chris, that they hadn't had before, that we thought we would try and capture it. So we pulled together all of those different statements, published them in a book, and sent it to the whole function. And what's been really interesting about it is the connections and the conversations that have come on the back of it.
Yeah.
So as colleagues read this and get to understand what's motivating somebody that they're working with or on a project team with, this is the inspiration for it. And we keep bringing people back to it. So we have some hangouts coming up with my team over the next couple of weeks, where some of the leadership team will share their purpose statements and just remind people what they've seen and done with it. Other colleagues in the function will share theirs as well. So this first one was really trying to connect that individual purpose with our team purpose and our overall purpose, to create that sense of connection and emotional engagement.
I love the fact that you got it there, because I'm sure there's people in your team that have been working together for years that now didn't know these things about each other. Myself and my co-founder Shane, we went on a similar workshop around leading with purpose, and I think we learned more, even though we've known each other since was 8 years old. I think
Yeah.
We grew up next door neighbors, and we learned more in those 2 days about each other, I think, than we did in probably the last 10 years. We found that, a lot of the purpose statements stem from experiences as a childhood, and that then kind of shapes kind of how you think, feel, act when you grow up. It allowed us to be a closer partnership as co-founders of this business.
Absolutely. And I think there's a couple of really important things there, Chris, in what you were saying. Firstly, in the sort of industry that we're in, which is highly analytical, it's highly knowledge based, it's highly IQ dominated, bringing that EQ and that emotional connection isn't something that's always evident, but I thought particularly in human resources, we needed to put the human back in human and balance that. So I think that element was really key. And we often talk in industry about people bringing their whole selves to work, but actually want to get then very selective about that. So don't bring this bit, or don't bring that experience, or that's really great, but you're better keeping that at home. And what I think the purpose conversations did was just give people permission to be themselves, to actually share what was on their mind, what their drivers were. And some of the stories that came out of that were truly emotional stories, as you say, some resonating back to childhood, and showing that vulnerability as they shared those stories, I think has had really profound impact on those relationships and on the movement we've created.
Yeah, we had people in our group that I was in a group full of entrepreneurs. It was a workshop with there's actually a set of CHROs on one side of the room, actually, strangely enough. And I was on a group with a number of entrepreneurs, and I felt very insecure because we were a startup and I was on a table with literally some billionaires. So I was like, what am I going to learn? What are they going to learn from me? I was, absolutely astounded by the level of detail and trust. I shared more with those strangers than I have with some of my closest friends. And because we went through a scenario of sharing what was called our crucible stories, and this is some work that Nick Craig does, and he's sharing basically the 3 toughest moments of your whole life with strangers, and that is tough to go through. And I was revisiting some moments in my life that I didn't really want to revisit or haven't revisited in many years, but being able to dive into that with these, I built such strong connections with those people. We're still connected to this day. We talk all the time mainly in our WhatsApp group as well. But what came out of that, so many things that I realized that connected to how I got to where I was, because I always thought, how did I end up in this role, in HR, doing content, doing a podcast? And I realized looking back that it was kind of always meant to be, from the kind of signs throughout my childhood and growing up. And there was complete strangers recognizing this that I didn't recognize as well. So it's extremely powerful to go through it as well. And if you'd have told me going in that I'd be emotional and there was people in my group crying whilst reading out their purpose statement, I would have said you're crazy. But it truly is that impactful.
It is, and thanks for sharing your own journey on that, Chris.
I can say my purpose statement as well, by the way. So my purpose statement is to be the unbreakable artist that dances you to life. I have to explain that a little bit. And these are key words throughout there. So unbreakable artist is really all about, I've always gone against the grain. So even growing up and in business, I've always challenged the status quo. I've always been that person in the room that says, but why? but why? And everyone's like, no, but it's just how we do it, Chris. And I'm no, but why? Why are we doing it that way? And that's since a child growing up, I've always been like that. And even in this business, I said to Shane, why can't we have the #1 HR podcast in the world? Why can't we do this? Why can't we do that? And that's really led to success and innovation in what we do. So that's sort of and when I say artist, as a kid, all I did for a lot of the trauma that I went from, not going to get into the detail, is my escape from all of that was my art. So drawing, painting, actually sculpting with clay, stuff like that. So I use those words that really mean a lot to me and trigger something emotionally. So the unbreakable artist. I could have used other words, but artist for me is something to connect with. And then dances you to life. I used to be a dancer, as I mentioned before. And one of my favorite things about what I get to do, and I have done for the last 15 years, is develop people. And that's where it's sort of dancing you to life. I get no better joy than having someone join a business and seeing them grow and flourish and develop. There's something about that is just, as a leader, is so satisfying as well. So those are the 2 core areas of our business that actually, as a CEO, that I focus on, is the innovation in our business, and I focus on developing people. And so that really helped me and Shane, that when we got back to the organization after, this is where Chris is spending his time, because this is connected with his purpose. And that has driven so much growth and value in organizations that are focused on that. This is aligned with my purpose, that it was pretty incredible. And then similar with Shane, we realized that these are his strengths. And we were both operating, by the way, in all these other areas of our business that didn't align with our purpose. And it was spending so much time and so much energy. And it was almost kind of exhausting because it didn't connect. So bit of a long story, but I just wanted to
no, and thanks for sharing it, because I think there's a couple of things that stand out for me really strongly from that, and you mentioned it before as well, but it's worth coming back to. The first is the impact that we can have if we truly look at life through the lens of our purpose and the decisions that we make, and secondly, the stories that we tell around it. So I'm turning to the first one, and our purpose. This drives behaviors. If we can make decisions to do things together or not, we can do them with courage or not. And I think, just as you were saying, that they are a filter for the lens that you, or a lens for the filter that you want to do, is really important, because it goes beyond just words. It drives action. So for us, if we want to be courageous or inspire confidence, we have to do things that require courage. There's no point just aspiring to it and hoping that purpose will realize by itself. It won't unless we take actions. If we want to be known for accelerating impact, it requires us to do things faster than we did in the past. And I think that's a really important dynamic, which again sometimes gets lost with a purpose. And the second element, which you highlight so rightly, is that human connection and the power of telling a story.
Yeah.
So you building up around your purpose, what the influences are, immediately, I'm sure, grabbed everybody's attention. And it was that principle that led us to the second element of our program, which is hashtag tell our story.
Mm-hmm.
So having built on that initiative of people sharing their purposes, we really wanted to fill HR EMEA full of stories. So again, we worked with Intelligent Emotion to create our strategic narrative for the function, which is basically the story of us. So what are we proud of? What are the opportunities that we see? What are the barriers that we need to overcome? What are the priorities? What are the behaviors that we need to change? And what does the future look like? So it is in itself a story. It uses very visual images, very non-corporate images, uses very human language, which again came from our colleagues, and is effectively the glue that holds the narrative together. And to bring that to life, we then asked and continue to ask colleagues across HR EMEA to share a story that highlighted one of those abstract concepts, and very deliberately not looking for stories from business, which tend to end up being more examples than they do proper stories. Actually getting them to tell a real personal story with a beginning, a middle, and an end, and some color around it that illustrated the point of what we were doing. And I think it was really on the back of that we got the momentum that we did in the function, because people now recognize individuals by their stories, not just by their job titles or the connections that they've had with them.
Yeah, love it. You kind of just touched on it a little bit, but I was going to ask, because in terms of the performance perhaps that you've seen, how is this driven performance in the business in terms of attracting talent, deepening customer loyalty, within your team, within the business? Could you share some stories that have taken place in the corporate environment since you've rolled out this program?
I think there's two lenses to that. One is an immeasurable one, which is just the sense of connection and human relationships, which are hard to track through metrics. But if I look at some of the key data points, employee engagement's gone up significantly. So it was down at 54% in 2015 when I joined, up in the early 70s now, which is Aon upper quartile. Our customer satisfaction scores have gone up from -13 on an NPS to +32. Now, within HR EMEA, we've seen really good traction on our own internal agility metrics, with things like adapting at speed and empowerment going up 15 points, being courageous and curious going up 6 points. We already had high scores on collaboration, but they went up even further. So, can you relate all of that directly to some of the work we've been doing? No, because there's been other things going on in group HR and in the wider organization that I think have accelerated that. But when you look into some of the comments that sit beneath it, I think we can draw real clear links to not only that deep sense of purpose that we have through our little book of why, but the emotional connection that we've created through hashtag tell our story.
JC on LinkedIn said, first of all, he said, thanks for sharing. And he said, how did you manage in the context of the larger Swiss Re organization? Did you build a separate purpose, or is it just you've only mainly focused within your own EMEA team?
Actually, the other way around. So we as an organization have that purpose of we make the world more resilient. So that's the group business purpose. That's the whole business. And what we were trying to do within HR EMEA was how do we connect our purpose to that
Okay.
corporate purpose. So a little bit of the other way round, but it has provoked conversations both across the wider HR function and teams in the business. So as we talk about this, as we blog about this, what I'm now actually seeing is a number of my HR advisors have been asked by the teams of which they're a part, or the businesses that they support, to help facilitate the development of purpose statements as well. And there is a bit of a mixed view on this. There is one school that says you should only have one purpose, don't dilute it, don't compromise it, let's everybody align to that. And there is a second one that says actually the closer the created sense of purpose is to your ecosystem, be that a team or a department or a business unit, the more resonance it's likely to have. I'm of that school. I think if you want those human connections and bridge to a broader purpose, then it needs to be proximate and tangible. I think what is absolutely critical, though, is that you cannot have a lack of congruence or a disconnect with the overall group purpose, because if you have lots of different organizations or different teams running off with a completely different non-aligned sense of purpose, you'll never achieve that group or global purpose. So you have to be able to join the dots, I think, but you can still have your own wording and your own phrase and your own context which resonates more closely.
In terms of this training that you've done around it, how many people have gone through this?
So the training we did specifically was for my colleagues in HR EMEA, so that was about 100 people. We don't have a formal program of rolling it out. We've got a number of other initiatives that we're working on, but I think that there's two things. One, again, we are really talking about the power of purpose more broadly. So even though we've done this within my team, those conversations about purpose come top down in the organization and bottom up. So it's not remote from that. And secondly, as I say, I know of at least 10 teams that have reached out to my HR advisors and partners and wanted to go through something similar, but it's been very ad hoc and not part of a specific program, which I'm okay with. One of our aspirations in our leadership imperatives and leadership from every seat is that we want to create that joint movement and that we want to take personal accountability. So if this fuels into the system in an organic way without being force, I think that's really rich. Obviously there are different ways of doing it, but I think within a purposeful organization that Swiss Re is, mandating it is probably the wrong way to go, and forcing a rollout.
The reason I ask that is a lot of the HR leaders I speak to, they end up putting programs together like this for their leadership team and their line managers, but not for their own team. And that was what's quite unique about what your story is you specifically focus within your own team. And whereas every other CHRO that I've spoken to, they've brought in these different type of programs for their high potentials, their leadership team, their line managers, but not specifically their own HR team, which I thought was really unique. And
absolutely,
a very strong bond between you all and sense of purpose, obviously.
We really do. And, as an organization, we do have those group programs. We do have the development programs. It was in fact on one of those that I was inspired on my own journey. But I was really conscious of two things, Chris. One, that I didn't want the HR function or my HR function to be the cobbler's children and not experience this. So I think there was a strong motivation there. But secondly, I'm absolutely convinced that HR can be a catalyst for change in the business. So by creating this joint movement within my own function, getting people connected, it is having an impact in the business and the wider Swiss Re community, because you now have 100 HR colleagues going to business leaders and saying, we want to put purpose ahead of pragmatism. We want to work with courage. How can we inspire confidence in your business? So you're already changing that dynamic. And then secondly, as I mentioned, it is catching on and more people want to have the conversation than before. So I take that as huge wins, that we've really invested in the capability and confidence of my team, but we've also been catalysts for different conversations across the organization.
What would you say to people listening to this right now that are thinking, well, we don't have a budget of Swiss Re to invest in something like this?
I honestly don't think budget is a big issue here. Anybody can sit and have a conversation that says, what's important to you, why are you here, and how can I help you? That is absolutely for free. And I think even if you just have that conversation with somebody who works for you or in your team, you can start creating that joint movement. And I should say, this collateral has not been expensive. We've invested in bringing.
Say that, which is why I asked it, because I think people have this misconception.
I think there's there may be a perception that this is hundreds of thousands of dollars of collateral. It's not. It's low tens of thousands, and a lot of the stuff we've created in-house, the work we did with Intelligent Emotion was a real good catalyst. So we invested in them to kind of get the ball rolling. But the key thing for us is that it's become self-sustaining. And you see people picking up different elements of it, and it's not expensive. I think the one additional piece of advice I would give is have the courage to break out of the corporate constraints of these conversations, because we're all CHROs in corporate organizations. We love the corporate imagery, we love going through the brand team to do these things, to create the polished look, and sometimes we just need to challenge that a little bit, and very deliberately, if you look at what we've put in our strategic narrative, it's very human, very non-corporate language, and it's that resonates. People aren't going to remember or be inspired by bullet points. They are going to be inspired by human sentences that you might actually talk to your friends and family about. So I think that would be the biggest advice. Start somewhere and be courageous to challenge the status quo.
Yeah. Maybe briefly before we go, if you could give everyone, because I've been through a program like this, obviously you have, but maybe people that are very new to this, could you give them a very short overview of what their program looked like? What does it consist of? How long was it? Just to give people some, so they can kind of paint a picture a little bit of what that looked like.
Yeah, so at two levels. So the group program that initially inspired all of us around purpose was a 2.5-day event in a retreat style rather than a typical learning intervention style. What we've done in HR EMEA has been much more informal. So the individual team groups having their conversation around purpose was just self-organized, really with very little training, just a facilitator's guide. The bigger event around Tell Our Story was a 1-day event where we pulled everybody together and actually got them to tell a story, and then we've just used internal media after that to keep the story alive.
So you had to set the same set of questions that you kind of outlined that each group then asked, captured that information.
Yeah.
How did you capture that and keep that in?
So we worked initially with our consultants who sparked those conversations. They captured what the individuals had written and teased them out a little bit, what made sense, what resonated, what were they really trying to get at, and then captured all of those in this little book of why.
That is really that is the outcome.
that is the outcome. So I mean, you probably can't see it very clearly, but
we can see it. It looks great.
It's got all the pages of all the colleagues and their statements.
So that's all of your EMEA teams in that book.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
And then we have our strategic narrative at the back, so people can refer to it. So that effectively is the output that captured it, and it's what we keep coming back to have those ongoing conversations about.
Amazing. Well, look, thanks again for joining us. It's been a pleasure. And before we wrap up, if there's sort of one parting piece of advice, you've given so much advice, but if there's one parting piece of advice, what would that be? And then where's the best place for everyone to connect with you? If they want to reach out with you, connect with you, where's the best place for them to go?
So I think the best advice is make it real, make it human, make it connect with people, and make it part of your infrastructure. So as I said at the start, I wanted this to be more than a comms event. So we now use our purpose in our job descriptions for recruiting, and we interview around, you know, who's demonstrated confidence and who hasn't. We use it as the filter for our performance management. So people know, for example, when I do my quarterly check-ins, I will be asking them, what have you done together in the last quarter? Where have you demonstrated confidence? How have you challenged the business? And that's the lens for the conversation. So I think that, to sum that up, the best advice is that it's something that's live and used, and not something that just sits on a shelf. And in terms of connecting with me, delighted to share my experiences with anybody. I'm on LinkedIn, and email is james_hartley@swissre.com. I'd be delighted to share any more stories about this. I am passionate about purpose and genuinely believe that it is the magic ingredient that can unlock individual and corporate potential.
Thanks again. I appreciate it. And for everyone on LinkedIn, thanks as always for joining us and tuning in. We appreciate you taking the time out. And apart from that, obviously go follow James over on LinkedIn there. And I'll see you all, hopefully see you in person soon, James. Sooner rather than later as well.
Let's hope so. Looking forward to connecting in real life. And thank you everyone for having me on the show, and wishing you all very well.
Fantastic. Enjoy the rest of your day. See you later. Bye.